Greetings. Welcome back. This is our Frederick Riddle, and I am bringing you that becoming a published author is fun. And it is and can be and often is fun. This is episode number 3. And today we're going to be looking at self-publishers. Last episode we looked at traditional, and we looked at some rather negative facts about them. Well, today we're going to take a look at self-publishers. And so let's get started. Our first thing is self does not mean self. And you say, wait a minute now. That's what it says, self-publishers. Well, yes. And it's a cute little phrase that came up, and I bought into it. And like a lot of people have, I bought into it thinking that self meant self. But I think when you're done with this episode, you will agree that self, in this case, does not mean self. So let's take a look at this. We've already established that. Another name for self-publishing is a vanity press. Now, I used to think there were two different things, but then when I started really looking at it, I realized they're talking about the same thing. And the reason it was called vanity press is because you simply paid for the publishing, which nothing wrong with that, but you paid for the publishing. There was no real criteria. They didn't care what your genre was. They didn't care the quality of your writing. Basically, they didn't care about anything. As long as they got their money, they were going to publish your book. And that was something that just was, it resulted in a lot of trash. Remember, we talked about that previous one. I believe when we talked about traditional, I talked about trash. But the thing is that there is a lot of trash out there. And a lot of it came from the vanity press. It was simply an ego trip. So that you could say, I wrote that book. Yes, sirree, I am an author. Well, yes, you got the book. Your name's on it. The cover. The description is very good, and boy, it is. Whoever told you could write? It was trash. And that's still out there. I do believe that they've made a lot of changes to improve their image, because that's the thing that they had. They had a bad image. And so when people talk about self-publishing, a lot of them go back to this. And that's what they'll talk about. Well, things have changed over the years, and they have gotten better. They do go in and they look at what you already have and what you want to publish. They will give criteria. When I published with them, with a self-publisher, I used a picture that I came up with. I believe I downloaded it actually off the internet and then uploaded it to them. And so they used that picture. It was a good quality picture, and they used it. And so they will use pictures that you come up with. And that is a good thing. They do, I believe they do have criteria now as to what those photographs and so forth, the pixels per inch and so forth, have to be. That's an improvement. So there have been improvements in it. But it still has that. It's going to be a long time before they ever get rid of that image entirely. Self-publishing, though, that's not the problem. We're just for the purposes of this episode, we're going to say that that's not an issue anymore. It's still out there, but it's not an issue that we're going to look at. We're going to look at this part right here. Why doesn't self mean self? And so to do that, let's move on. First of all, let's look on to royalties. How do they rate as far as royalties go to the traditional? Now, do they pay in advance? No, they do not pay in advance, which in my book is probably a good thing because remember, you had to repay it back. But royalties, when we were looking at traditional, was 8%, all the way up to 35%. Now you've got a new one. This one here is 35%. That's where you start out. All the way up to, I believe it's 60. It might be 70, but we'll just go with 60. The difference between this one and this one is how you distributed the book. They have different methods of distributing. They have international, and then they have local. They have different features that can be involved. And so depending upon which one you go with, you'll either get the 35 or the 60%. And that's of what's left after the publisher took their costs out. Which brings us to why it is not self, why it is not you that it's talking about. So let me ask you some questions. You wrote the book, okay? Who put the time into it? You or the publisher? That's easy. You did. Nowadays you might use AI, but that's another subject altogether. We're going to say you. Okay? Who put all the work into it? You. We're kind of on a roll here, aren't we? You put the time in. You put the work in. But who gets the profits? Now you look at this and you say, oh wow, if I'm getting 60%, I'm getting most of it. Not necessarily. You were getting 35 to 60% of the net, which means after their costs are taken out. So they're getting, even here, they're still getting 40%, plus they're getting the basic fee that they took out. So now you might see that 60% is actually not 60% of the gross, it's 60% of the net. So the publisher is the one making the money. They're the one in control. They're the one who says this is what it's going to be. They control as to the book itself. Now, when I was writing my book, I wrote a book. My very first book was called Refuge: The Genesis Chronicles. It was a story about Noah and the flood, but actually it was about his nephew. And Noah, though, was a main character in the book. And so I wrote the book. I'm rather proud of that book. Still am. It's no longer in print. I may eventually rewrite it and come up with a different title and everything. But the thing is this. I made a mistake in there. And I corrected it. And it really wasn't so much a mistake. It was just a change of opinion of how I wanted to do it. So I did it. And I went through the whole book and did it the way I wanted it done. And so I turned it over to them. And they said, okay, this is a proof copy. Go through your proof copy and report back to us all the errors you find. Good. And then they said, you have 48 hours to get this done. Now, I got the book, I believe it was on a Friday, late Friday. So I had 48 hours and spent Saturday and Sunday. And then, so they were supposed to have my answer back by Monday. Okay, that's not very long. Especially for me, going to church on Sunday morning and evening, that cuts the time down even more. But even if that wasn't cut down, it was cut down more than what I could really. I soon discovered I needed much more time than 48 hours. You see, I had divisions within each chapter where I would have scenes, and I may have 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or more scenes in a row. But then I wanted to change to a different character, a different location, a different scenario, whatever. And to do that, I either used a symbol or I used a white space. I don't remember now what it was. I think I used a symbol. And the way that symbol played out, they made a mistake on it. Not me. They made a mistake. That mistake was repeated all the way through the book. Now, for me to report that back to them, I had to tell them what page number it was, where it was located on the page, blah, blah, blah. Well, that was throughout the book. So every time I made that division, that error showed up. And so that meant they could, some scenes may only last a few lines, and then I made another shift. And so they had this thing, and this error went all the way through the book. I didn't have enough time to go in and write it all down to report every last occasion for that error. So eventually I had to send it in as it was, and it got published. Now, for me to go back and get that corrected, at that time they did not offer me any opportunity to go back and correct a published book. Now, they may do that now, but if they do, they're still limited. You may have one or two times that you can do it. Not add, not going forward, not continuing forward. And so that really, I don't know if anybody else ever noticed it. I never heard a criticism of it, but it bothered me. And it bothered me not only because it occurred, but because I did not have the opportunity to go in and correct it after I discovered it. That's called control. And that's control belonged to the publisher. They told me what I could and could not do. They told me, and they put limitations on what I could do. Even when they said, you can do this, they have limitations on it. And so control was a very important factor to me, and eventually would lead me away from self-publishing. First to a hybrid, which wasn't any better, and then finally to another better way that I'm going to talk to you about in the next episode. You have a great day.